Fanservice is a term that has quite plagued anime for so long. A lot of people have linked fanservice to porn. They may not do it now, but certainly when I was watching anime, they thought I was watching porn. And fanservice in general just has a terrible, terrible stigma on it that it really just hasn't been able to shake off. Fanservice can be displayed in two ways, but for the sake of this video, I'm only going to explain the one way, which is a girl or even a guy exposes some part of their body in some weird scenario in which to appease the fans. Because of this small aspect, a lot of people are reluctant to watch anime, saying that it's full of nothing but fan service that does nothing to the plot. And a lot of times they are right. Fan service does absolutely nothing to the plot, even though it's used in abundance. In our path to become mainstream, we do have quite a long ways to go, especially when becoming accepting of fan service and its function in anime. Several shows with a lot of fan service are not even claimed anime or are not even looked at because of the excessive amounts of fan service that they have. In our path to being mainstream, one of the roadblocks that we will have to overcome is making fan service an acceptable factor in the world of anime. What is funny is that a lot of anime are overlooked or underestimated because of the amounts of fan service that they use, saying that fan service does nothing for the plot, and those that use it excessively have no plot, no story, and are just there to appease the fans. And for the most part, these people are right. There are several anime that I can name off the top of my head that do the same thing and have an abundance of fan service, but it really adds nothing to the plot, and it has no plot, no story, and it only appeases the fans. But that wasn't until I watched No Game No Life that I kind of changed my perspective just a little bit. As weird as it may seem, No Game No Life has taught me that fan service can be acceptable if used in the right place, in the right time, and in the right plot. No Game No Life, for what it's worth, kind of has an abundance of fan service, more fan service than a lot of harem styles. But it has also taught me that because it has a lot of fan service, because it uses it in the right place, time, and plot, it's actually quite acceptable. The reason why the fan service is so acceptable in No Game No Life, because it does a great job from the very beginning establishing these characters. But we'll get more into that later. If you haven't watched No Game No Life and you're curious about it, I would say go and watch it, because it is a great example of how fan service can be correctly used in an anime and still keep its plot, its character development, and all its other fantastic elements throughout the story. Now I will also say this. Besides the excessive amount of fan service, No Game No Life is a masterpiece of an anime in terms of aesthetic, in terms of plot, in terms of story, in terms of how it combined everything together. There aren't really a lot of anime that can really do it as well as No Game No Life has done. In fact, No Game No Life ranks pretty high on my anime list, and also really high on a YouTuber's top 10 list that he did just to see what the community thought. And it placed at, I think, number 11. That's just a little bit above Fairy Tail, or I think Fairy Tail was before. Regardless, it placed really, really high, almost at the top 10. But is this placing so high all because of the excessive amount of fan service of hot girls jumping around? No. No Game No Life actually has a lot of deep little concepts to it that at first don't seem apparent, but if you really think about it, it's actually mind-boggling. Let's begin with the story. No Game No Life revolves around two characters by the name of Sora and Shiro. Sora is age 18 and Shiro is age 11. Oh, quick fact, I gotta mention that they're technically brother and sister, but they're not, because they're not related by blood, which brings up the old classic not related by blood cliche, but we're still brother and sister. These two, obviously because they are neats, are really good at games. Especially as a duo, they are considered unbeatable. Out of all the games that they play online, they are considered blank because they are two mysterious characters who actually leave their username blank. One day they receive a mysterious email from some random player who asked them to play a game of chess. After long hours of playing, they actually defeat this mysterious person. And then he asked them, if you went to a world of games, would you go? And Sora simply replies, if it's a world full of games, then we were born in the wrong world. And thus begins their adventure. You see, the person who emailed them was the goddess Tet, God Tet, who is the god of games, or really the god of play. He invites them to his world called Discord, in which no war is allowed, there's no violence, and everything is determined by games. All you would have to do is abide by the 10 rules, and everything, considering if it's war or if it's even getting a piece of candy, is resolved through a game. Now, Sora, Shiro, and Tet, they want to play each other again, but Tet gives them a little challenge. That is, they must defeat all 16 races in order to have another chance to play Tet once again. Agreeing to this challenge, they begin their adventure to dominate all 16 races so they can play the God of Play once again. Seems like a fun story, right? But now I'm going to tell you where is the issue with it. So, despite its clear and concise story, again, it does share a lot of fan service. And I will admit, there is one episode at the end of it in which I really cannot defend it as being an intelligent show with acceptable fan service, because I did think that the fan service was just out of place for the show. But other than those 2 episodes, the other fan service within the show was actually quite acceptable. But a lot of people don't think so. A lot of people think the fan service can be grotesque and a little disturbing, especially parts of incest come into play. But there is a reason why all of that is in play. I feel like that the fan service is the biggest issue of why people don't like the show, if there are people that don't like the show. Because for the entire show, the aesthetic, the animation, the story, and the characters were actually pretty good. But it's really this fan service that we can get over. But why? Now, I get, again, as I said, episode 12 and 13, I think, were completely unacceptable. It kind of just disturbed the flow, and it was just really there for the fans. Again, it was a great 2 episodes to watch, but then at the same time, it was, why was the fan service there? But again, the rest of the anime, I really can't say that, and here's why. The first thing that we talk about is the characters. The characters are introduced quite well in the very beginning. They are 2 NEETs with no connections with the outside world, and all they do is play games. Now, you may ask, so what does that have to do with the fan service thereof? Let's take a look at Sora, who is 18, and he's a NEET, and he's never been outside. So because he's never been outside, and because he plays games, you can safely say that he is a virgin. Actually, he points this out himself in one of the episodes that he is a virgin. And being a virgin, especially for that long, makes you pretty curious, honestly. And this makes you curious about pretty much everything female related, whether it be your non-blood related sister, or it could be the girl who was the queen of humanity. I'm not supporting incest in any way, by the way. But it's because these characters were so developed to me. Well, moreover, it's because these characters were defined from episode 1 that I was able to accept the fan service more in my head. Though the incest with his sister was honestly kept at quite a low, and I didn't really notice it until it was brought up to me, or I had to do research on this video. My issue with fan service is that it must be acceptable, and it must make sense to a plot for it to make sense, not just to show off some girl's body part or whatever it is just to appease the fans. So anime like Masho Gakuen HH, Handshakers, and Hajimete no Gal make no sense because they portray scenarios and contexts that are just not real in real life and are only there to appease the fans or just to fill some fetishes if that's what you prefer. Let's take a look at another example of an anime that uses fanservice in such an impeccable and genius way. Kono Subarashi Shufuku Sekayo, or Konosuba for short. Now, there was a ton of fan service in Konosuba, as also great laughs and just amazing comedy. But the fan service was acceptable because of how the character and the plot was established from episode 1. The one thing to note about Konosuba which made it work so well was that it was self-aware from episode 1. This single factor alone is the reason why Konosuba was such a successful comedy that made a parody of the isekai genre. But nevertheless, it established its characters and its plots from episode 1. So to me, the fan service was quite acceptable because it was a parody of the whole genre in the first. In Konosuba, everything was kind of a joke. As far as the missions, the characters, even the very way of life was just all a big joke. And so was the fan service. By establishing the characters and the story as a parody, this gave tons of room for tons of elements, and one of those elements was fan service. So now it's not really about the girls appeasing the fans, even though if you want to take it that way you can. I feel like it's more about being a parody and making fun of it rather than really trying to appease the fans. And that makes Konosuba really successful because it was such a parody that stayed a parody up until its 2 seasons in which it ended. Rest in peace, Konosuba 2017. But with that being said, you can't say that the fan service in Konosuba was merely just to appease the fans with the girls' big breasts, even though if you want to consider it that way, you can. And the Japanese companies know that, that's why they put it in there. But I feel like the fan service was mainly to make a parody on the whole grand scheme of things, the isekai genre, the fan service genre, the whole setup of the anime community. I feel like that's what the purpose of the fan service just in Konosuba. But now, what does that have to do with No Game No Life? Well, No Game No Life follows the same principle without it being a satire of the entire gaming genre. But the fan service is acceptable because of how the plot and the characters were set up. Again, it would, if Sora was the same character, but the fan service didn't allow him to be the character that he should be, which is a 18-year-old virgin who really likes girls, then the character would not be believable. There is actually a Japanese story called Shinan and Hamaji, which one author said it didn't make sense because the two characters were too perfect. And I feel like by putting fan service in there, that's what No Game No Life did. By putting the fan service in there, it allowed these characters to be imperfect and to act weird and creepy, if you will. And that's acceptable because of how our interpretations of virginity and being closed inside and not really having that social interaction is. I feel like if fan service wasn't in the original series of No Game No Life, I think that it wouldn't have done as successful as it has in the Western community. Whether you like it or not, the fact that it's in there is one of the factors why it works so well. Now let's look at one last example, the No Game No Life movie. Now I'm going to say this. The No Game No Life movie was absolutely amazing, and it kept the same aesthetic, the same theme, and the same plot as the original series. So it's almost like we just didn't miss Sora and Shiro whatsoever. And it really didn't have as much fan service as the original series. But again, that was okay for the fact that the characters were established from episode 1. So because Riku was such a serious and very edgy character, it made no sense to incorporate tons of fan service because he was such an edgy and serious character. Though the movie followed some of the tropes of No Game No Life, incest and a little bit of fan service and just the passion for games, it was a very, very successful movie that kept me glued to the screen up until the end credits. Let's say, for instance, if a lot of fan service equivalent to that in No Game No Life was placed in No Game No Life 0, then I feel like it wouldn't have been such a good movie because you are trying to put fan service in context that makes no sense. The difference between No Game No Life and a lot of anime that incorporates fan service is that the fan service made sense considering the situation. Whereas if you did it in No Game No Life Zero, it didn't make sense because it's not in the right context. In my opinion, I think fan service is such an outdated word and it's taken into too much of an outdated context. And No Game No Life, in its weird way, has been affected by this considerably. It's not enough to where it hasn't destroyed the fan base, but it is affected in the way that it is viewed. And quite honestly, I have to say that it's not really fair because apart from the mass amount of fan service that you can claim that it was there, which again in the last 2 episodes there were, the anime had amazing aesthetic, amazing animation, a major character development, and amazing plot, and you really can't go wrong with that. So again, if you're looking for something new and something a little slow paced, then this show is the good show for you. Again, if you can stomach the fan service and if you can look past that, then I highly recommend that you give this show a try. Because again, it has so many outstanding factors to it that just to say that fan service completely destroys the show is really not fair. But let me know in the comments, what do you think about No Game No Life? You know, did you think, if you watched it, did you think it was a good show? You know, did you think the fan service got in the way? What did you think about the movie? What do you think about us never getting a season 2? Why can't we get a season 2? Let me know all that in the comments below.